Hi, how are you?
Hi.
We're waiting for some people to funnel in and we're going to get going. I'm really excited. Oh, your tree looks so pretty.
Oh, thank you.
All right. I'm going to mute everybody um, for now. Oh, let me just give you a couple more people coming in. And I know we've got people that are at all different levels of the Enneagram. And so I'm going to teach this workshop and this is the first time I'm doing this particular workshop, guys. So I'm letting you know and I want you to be totally honest on the format because I kind of opened it up to anybody that either is not familiar at all with the Enneagram or maybe they've oh, I took a quiz, I typed myself, but I'm not really sure what to do with it. So my whole purpose
That's me.
of that's yeah. And so my whole thing, and I'm going to kind of get into the I'm going to get into you know what my goals are, but really it's all about helping you be able to apply this information, because one of the things is with any of these types of tools, it's great that you know all this information. It's like, okay, I know I'm a 6 or I know I'm a 2 or I know, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean practically? And so what I like to do is just take the information and then say, okay, how can we use this to help me have healthier communication? Maybe it's where I'm struggling with clutter. Maybe it's, you know, communicating with my kids, my spouse, my whatever it is. So that's going to be the purpose of today's webinar. So I have a lot that I want to cover before I dive it into the Q&A. So I am going to just, let me just see how I can do this. I want to I don't want to mute myself. I want everybody to mute themselves. Of course, participants in the wrong setting, people. Sorry. Nope. Okay. Everybody is mute all. Okay. And you guys, if you have a question or when it's time for Q&A, just write your questions in the chat for now so you don't forget them. And then when we go to the Q&A, I'll be able to pull them all up. And of course, you guys can unmute yourself. So I'm going to share my screen, even though I don't want to necessarily do all this teaching from, from a presentation, but I think for our visual learners, it'll be really helpful to be able to just look at the slides as we're going through. So I'm going to kick it off. Let me just get back to the top of my queue and hit the slideshow, and then I can share my screen. Okay, and share my screen. Okay, let's see what we go here. Share screen. Let's see. Nope, you don't need that. There you go. Is everyone? Hopefully everybody's got this. Okay, so what is the Enneagram? The Enneagram, if you don't already know, is basically as simple as it can be, is a personality typology. And what differentiates it from other personality typologies like DISC, Strength Finders, Myers-Briggs, is it looks at the why we do what we do. In other words, the motivation behind it. So where a lot of other personality typologies are looking at your behavior. Are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? How do you show up? The Enneagram takes it back a layer. So we're looking at certain behaviors, but that's not what determines your Enneagram type. What really determines your type is what motivates you to do the things and behave the way that you do. So it's a both and. It is your behavior, but your behavior stemming from your motivation. And in it's an onion with a lot of layers, but to really just simplify it, there's 9 core types. Each one of the types has different characteristics. As you can see from this wacky diagram, they have all these intersecting lines and arrows. And really, what that goes to show is the Enneagram is fluid. It's a fluid It's a fluid model. So there's connection points to all the different Enneagram types. So essentially there's a little bit of each Enneagram type in all of us, but everybody has one core type. And that core type is really what drives how you see the world, how the decisions that you make. But that doesn't mean that you don't rely on other strengths of other types, of the other characteristics of the 8 other types on the Enneagram. Oh, sorry, my clicker just wasn't. So, so the big question is, how do I figure out my type? And there's a lot of, different philosophies about how you figure out your type. People take quizzes, people go to workshops, they listen to podcasts, they read books. Lots of schools of thought. My school of thought is that I think the best way is self-discovery. I like to use a quiz as kind of a backup. You can, if you want to start with a quiz, I just hold it very loosely. I'm never going to tell somebody don't take a quiz, but what I will caution people to do is say, hey, just know that I'm oftentimes answering these questions based on how I think I should answer them, or how I maybe want to answer them, or how I'm feeling in this moment. I also have people that have answered questions based on kind of what they do in life. For example, I have a friend of mine who's a teacher, and so she's very much a helper in nature. And so a lot of the questions she was answering, she was looking at through her teacher lens in terms of what she did for a living. But at the end of the day, she's not really deep down in her core um motivated by the same things a 2 is motivated by. And so, but she typed as a 2 when she did the test because so much of her day-to-day job is very 2-ish, if that makes sense. And so I always tell people reading and self-discovery, listening, going to workshops is the best way for you to discover it. However, you can do, if you want to get that kind of extra validation and do a quiz, you certainly can do that. But what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through each of the 9 types, and I'm going to give a highlight overview over them. And then we're going to break down where each one of them has some strengths and where each one of them struggles. And then we could talk about how that might relate to clutter. Sound good? Okay. And again, if you have any questions, just pop it in the chat and we'll make sure that we get to it. Okay. So every type has a name that it's referred to. There's sometimes a couple different names. So I'm going to teach this in chronological order from 1 to 9. There's lots of different ways that you can teach the Enneagram, but for our purposes today, I'm just going to teach it right in chronological order. And so the ones are known as the perfectionists, right? Or they're known as the improver. And some basic characteristics of the 1 is they are constantly striving for perfection and they have a very strong internal critic. So they are harder on themselves than other people are hard on them. Most of their perfectionist nature is internally driven. And so they're very kind of black and white thinkers. They're what you would think of as your rule followers. And so a lot of times perfectionists will struggle with clutter differently than other types. So some of the strengths from a 1 when it comes to clutter and organization and where they might be strong is they're list makers, which is a great quality. They're very detail oriented. They're great at completing tasks. They are independent. Like if you give them a job, 1s will be sure to complete it. So think about a project. If you give a 1 a project, they're going to absolutely complete it. They're very, very accountable. And a lot of times they've got a strong internal accountability. So I talk a lot when I teach about internal and external accountability. 1s are great with internal accountability, which are all great qualities in general, and especially when it comes to like living a life of organization, right? Those are all awesome qualities. Where the 1s oftentimes get into trouble when it comes to organization, or where they might struggle, is this unhealthy need to be perfect. That is a pressure they put on themselves. So what will happen is a lot of times they will revise and revise and revise, and they will tweak things so many times. So it's really tough for them to like fully pull the trigger and make those decisions because they're like, it's not done yet, right? There's always another revision that they can do. Another big area where one struggle when it comes to clutter is about relinquishing control because they are so perfectionist in nature and they want everything done right and they feel that they can do it right. Oftentimes they will take on more than they need to. And so, in a practical sense, if you think about in a family dynamic, if one of the parents is a one, they might struggle with letting the kids make the bed or doing the dishes or taking part in some other project because they want it done just so. So what they will do is add on unnecessary pressure to themselves. And another thing that ones often do is because they feel like everything should be done a certain way, they avoid asking for help because again, they feel that they should be able to do it all. And as I mentioned earlier, their strong internal critic can get in the way of telling them that they've done things enough or to a level that they feel is acceptable. So those are the ones. Now I want to talk a little bit about the twos. So your twos are known as the helper. And again, you think of a caretaker role, you think of, a mom, a teacher. And again, there's no one specific career that any particular type has. There's no good or bad types. There's all just different characteristics. The helper, their internal narrative is they just feel that their worth is tied to being needed. And so that is something that is a driving force. So they're always putting others first. And again, that's not to say that other types don't put other people in front of them, but twos in particular, they will make their decisions based on how it impacts others and will do that almost to the detriment of putting themselves last. So oftentimes if twos are unhealthy kind of in their type, they end up falling into like a martyr syndrome. And what happens is because twos make decisions based in emotion, and we're not going to get too down into the rabbit hole of your dominant centers. We're going to do that in a follow-up workshop where we're talking all about the triads and the stances, the centers. Twos are in that feeling triad. So they make decisions emotionally. And so when you think about the decisions that you're going to be making, especially when it comes to clutter and organization, that can really get in their way, right? It can what is a gift could also become a burden. So some of the again strengths of the twos, they are just intuitively helpers. They're very supportive. They're the type of person that you could rely on to at any given moment to pick up your kid, to babysit for your kid, to volunteer for something at school or at church. They will always make time for somebody. That is in the two's nature to be very giving in nature. And they're very relational beings, which is awesome, right? Great qualities. But where twos need to really be careful and where it can become overwhelming for them in when it comes to living a more organized life is they will disregard their own needs. So they will just say, you know what, I'm going to put my own needs on the back burner. I'm going to drop what I'm doing to go help somebody else. And that becomes an unhealthy pattern. And the decisions a lot of times that they make are based out of feelings versus facts. So when you think about physical clutter, they might be holding on to things based on emotion, how they think it's going to impact somebody else. Oh, I can't get rid of this because so and so gave this to me. Or what if somebody comes to my house and they have a baby, and even though my kids are 12 and 14, I still need to have a high chair. Those are the kinds of decisions that or narratives that go through oftentimes a two's mind. And so they will, that can stand in their way. And because they are such helpers in nature, they will oftentimes interject and try to fix things that aren't theirs. So you're actually kind of creating more work for yourself as a two, as opposed to setting these healthy boundaries. It's always an area specifically with twos. I mean, I talk about all the types wanting to have healthy boundaries, but twos in particular, I think it's really, really important for them to be able to work on that. And because again, their decision making is steeped in emotion, sometimes they'll think really hard about making those decisions, because they have to really go through that whole process, because they are yes people, they are people pleasers by nature. And so kind of walking through that, you need to have a little bit of grace with yourself if you're a two, or if you are in a relationship with a two, just knowing that they need to kind of go through that emotional cycle before they can take action. So the next type I want to talk about are the threes, which are known as the achiever. And our threes, love three. I love all the types, right? But threes, just some characteristics to describe them. They are smart, they are savvy, they are very quick thinkers, and they are quick processors. They, if you meet them, they're oftentimes very charismatic. And I call them shapeshifters, because threes have this really incredible ability to like walk in and read a room really well. And so a three can walk in and see this person needs this, and I'm going to like show up in that way for that person. And this group of people needs this, and I'm going to show up that way. And so it doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing. I think it's just something that they have that, that feeling. They're still in that feeling center, although they don't wear their emotions on their sleeve the way a two does or the way a four does, but they still have that piece of the puzzle within them, which allow them to be really, great leaders and get people to listen and take action. And one of the surprisingly, kind of superpowers of the three is that they are really good multitaskers. And as a organizer, I'm always telling people, don't multitask, don't multitask. It's really ineffective. But threes have this weird superpower that they can do a lot of different things and do them well. I don't necessarily say that that's something that you should intentionally do, but if it's something that you find is working for you, most of the threes that I have talked to in my work are can juggle multiple things. And when it comes to living an organized life, that is really something that works to their benefit. And they're all about efficiency. How quickly can I get this done? And it's funny because I look at the threes versus a one, for example, and the threes motto is that done is better than perfect. And the ones are the opposite, where they're like, I have to revise it one more time. I have to revise it one more time. So I would like both of them to kind of like channel each other a little bit, when it comes to, getting things done. But threes are, like I said, they are natural leaders, and their worth, their motivation is really tied to their work. They are all about achievement, personal achievement. So they are, very good at leading, giving direction, seeing the big picture. They're a lot of times they're big visionaries, but where that can work against them is they can tend to oftentimes be workaholics or cut corners. So the devil's in the details a lot of times, and threes will just go to get something done, but not necessarily have the intentional detail. And so to make the connection when it comes to clutter and organization, I'm always talking about giving everything a home so that you can find it quickly when you need it. And threes are so concerned about getting it away because they don't want to see the physical clutter. They'll put it away, but they have to work on being really intentional of putting things away with purpose. Because what happens is, in an effort to put things away and be efficient, they oftentimes on the back end wind up wasting time down the road looking for something that they put away because they didn't put it away in its proper home, or paid attention as they were doing it, because they are just so action oriented. But again, because they are image conscious, and that is something that is really important to them, because again, that success, that achievement piece, that really plays into what their physical appearance looks like in terms of trying to be not surrounded by any type of physical clutter. So you may, if you have a three in your life, or if you're a three yourself, you might find that you walk into a space and just like put like, you could feel like the hair stand up on the back of your neck if you walk into a space that's filled with clutter, because it might just physically stress you out. And sometimes threes, because they are natural leaders, A lot of times they could be a little reluctant to take direction. Not always, but I think understanding the motivation of the three, and this goes really true for all of the types, really helps with that communication piece of knowing what strategies can I use that are going to resonate with that particular type. So, and because threes are kind of dominant personality types, it shows up more than it might in other types. So the next type, and the last type in this kind of feeling center right here is our fours, which are known as the individualist or the romantic. And the fours are what you would think of as your brooding musician, artists, creative folks. They are very unique and authentic and introspective. And I always say that fours are very kind of comfortable in the melancholy. And when we get to the sevens, if you guys are familiar with it, the sevens are the enthusiasts and they're all about fun and joy. And I feel like the four is the yin to the sevens yang. So where fours can be just like, I just want to sit and ponder things, sevens are like, go, go, go. So when it comes to where they struggle, oh, sorry about that, where their strengths are and where they struggle, some of the strengths of a four is they're out of the box thinkers. And that could be great because they'll come up with creative solutions for things. They're very accepting of others. So they have like a long runway and bandwidth where a lot of the other types have like a shorter fuse. Fours have a lot of margin in the scope of things. Fours and nines in particular, I think, are very accepting of other people. And they can kind of walk through things without getting sucked into it and trying to fix it. Where certain types are going to walk into a space that might be filled with clutter and all of a sudden try to find the solution and fix it and jump right in. A four is not going to necessarily do that. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, like, again, like I said, twos will go in there to try to fix things that might not be theirs to do. A four is not going to do that. They're just going to accept you for who you are. And if you're struggling with something, they're going to be there, but they're not going to try to fix you. And they're very passionate about what's important to them. And those are all great qualities of the four. But when it comes to organization, fours, I've seen fours struggle a lot. One of the areas in particular that a lot of fours struggle with comes with executive function, all that procedural processing things. And so I think being really mindful of, not getting lost. If you see, like, a lot of times they'll get lost in a project. So again, think that they're doing art or creating music or doing some sort of content creation or writing, and they get very almost hyper focused and can lose sight of time. They have like that time blindness because they are so hyper fixated on what they're doing that from an organization standpoint, when you think about being organized, it's about being disciplined and allowing certain time to execute certain tasks, right? Very task driven. And for fours, that is not something that comes necessarily intuitively. Now, I'm here to tell you, I know plenty of fours who are very organized because they've created a life and created routines that help them stay within those parameters, because they know that without those routines they could easily get kind of sucked into that, getting lost in what it is that what they're doing. So they've put these guardrails in place. And I think for all the types, it's knowing where your blind spots are and what guardrails can I put in. And for fours, I think having things like checklists, routines, timers on your phone, those are the types of things that really can help a four. So the next type is our fives. And now we're kind of moving into more of the headspace triad. And so the five, sixes, and sevens, they all make their decisions using thinking first. So they're very analytical. And that's going to play a role. So the fives are known as the investigator, or sometimes they're known as the observer. And it says that, one of the key characteristics of the five is they seem emotionally detached. Again, I know a lot of wonderful, nurturing fives, but on the surface, they seem like very, like there's almost like a barrier between you and them. It's more of a self-preservation, um, what's the word? Like kind of shield that they put around themselves. Fives are very analytical because knowledge is really important to them. They like having all of the facts. So I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Gretchen Rubin, but she has her 4 tendencies, and one of them is the questioner. And every single person that I know that is a 5 is also a questioner. So it doesn't mean that you have to be all questioners are 5s, but every single 5 that I know is a questioner. And one of the things, because they're very analytical, because they're very process driven, they actually crave predictability, where certain types don't want the predictability. They want things to be fun and spontaneous. The 5s are the opposite. They like routine. They like all of to know what's coming next, which is great as a strength, especially when it comes to organization. They like to have all their facts. They like predictability. They are very good at setting boundaries, where some of the types really need to work on setting their boundaries, like I mentioned with the 2 and some of the other types as well. 5s are really good for the most part at protecting their boundaries because they know that their time is so valuable. They really, really do a great job intuitively of protecting their time, their physical space, as well as their emotional space. So we think about different types of clutter. We're not just talking about physical clutter. We're talking about the mental load. We're talking about the emotional clutter. And so those are the things, not only the physical stuff, but all those emotional pieces that kind of suck our time and energy. The 5s intuitively are very good at setting those boundaries. Where they struggle is being emotionally guarded. And the first thing I have is they have a limited amount of energy. So in the Enneagram world, there's two particular types, the 5s and the 9s. Their energy plays a really big role in kind of their decision making. And so 5s have like this, what they talk about is a limited amount of energy. So like you run out of steam, where certain types, like I'm an 8, I could be like the Energizer Bunny and go, go, go. The 5s tend to run out of steam, and so do the 9s. And so whether they know it consciously or they know it subconsciously, that helps them to protect their time. But in the same token, if they're not being efficient with their time, they're going to run out of energy, and then they're not going to get the things done that they need to. So one of the things that I work a lot with 5s is to work on execution, because they're big planners, because they like that knowledge. And a lot of times 5s will mistake the actual planning of doing something for the actual doing something. So they'll talk about organizing, they'll get all the products, or they'll figure out this is what I'm going to do, and they'll map the whole thing out, but then they'll run out of steam and they haven't even done it yet. So one of the key takeaways for 5s is to work on the doing, like kind of jump in and just start doing it. And because 5s crave that predictability, they're oftentimes reluctant to change, because they know that what they're doing has a tried and true track record. And so changing that up can be off-putting and I don't even know if intimidating is the right word, but it can really be a struggle for 5s to find peace with the change. And again, their processing, it's a little bit slower, only in the sense that they want to have all the facts. So to gather all those facts that they need takes them time to gather it, process it, accumulate it, and then again, execute it. So we want to try to work with 5s to trust their gut a little bit more, and not rely so heavily on the head knowledge, and just take some kind of leaps of faith. Now, the 6s are also in that headspace, and they're known as the loyalists. And they are kind of what I call your worst case scenario thinkers. And a lot of 6s will struggle with anxiety. Again, all different types. I don't want someone to think, oh, I have anxiety, I must be a 6. All different types can struggle with any of these different things, but 6s in particular, because they are that worst case scenario thinkers, they will play out different scenarios. They struggle with a lot of self-doubt. And I find that 6s are the type of people that oftentimes just really need that external validation. They want that reassurance from somebody that they're on the right track. And so, but they are, 6s are I call them the good soldiers, because if you ask them to do something, as long as they're confident in knowing what the steps are, they're going to do it for you for sure. And sixes are, if you in a workplace, you want a six on your team, right? They are great team players. They're the people that are going to pass the ball on the basketball court or, give you the assist on the soccer field. They are great team players, but they are big planners. Again, because of that worst case scenario thinker, they're going to think of every different scenario there is. They're the people that are always looking at where the exit rows are. And they will look to authority for answers because they don't necessarily always trust themselves. So when it comes to clutter and organization, reading books, listening to podcasts, going to workshops, working one-on-one with somebody, even if it isn't a professional organizer, even if it's like somebody who they trust and respect that says, yeah, you could get rid of this, or it's okay to do this. Sometimes just having that extra validation, even though you don't technically need it, in their minds, it gives them that permission that it's okay to trust themselves. And again, they're super loyal. So I think these are all really like wonderful qualities. But where they might struggle is they are those, when I talk about emotional clutter, that what if, that guilt and fear, sixes are definitely the people that struggle with fear. That what if I get rid of it and I need it? What if, you know, you can go down the whole rabbit hole of things. And so kind of talking through that and factoring that into your process, if you are a six, it's okay. You just want to know that you're going to need a longer runway to process and make those decisions because you need to go through all the different scenarios. You will often question your own decisions. And that's why having an accountability partner there to be like, yep, you're on the right track. Yep, it's okay to get rid of those old boxes. Yep, it's okay to say no to this. All of those different areas where that might be a potential pitfall, just know that sixes are going to have to work through that process. But that's why it's okay to have that external validation and reassurance. And most of their procrastination is based out of fear. They don't want to make a mistake. Nobody wants to make a mistake, but sixes, again, because they don't necessarily trust themselves intuitively, they don't want to make a mistake. And so that's why they might procrastinate. And for sixes, a lot of times their stuff equals security, right? That means like, I'm a worst case scenario thinker. I need to have all of the things. So I'm going to almost like, I'm using the word hoard very loosely. People, I'm not saying true hoarders, but you want to keep that information because it gives me this false sense of me being secure. Okay. The sevens are known as the enthusiasts. And I know I referenced them earlier, and they're your fun seekers, right? They love experiences. They're super spontaneous. They love flexibility and the anticipation. They're very forward thinking. And so even though they're in the head triad, they like to do things. They're like movers and shakers, and they don't like being sitting still or being sedentary. And so when you think about clutter and organization, a lot of times, sorry, my thing is not working. Oh, hold on. Sorry, there we go. Clutter, organization can be boring and routine. And there's nothing that a seven likes less than routine. They want fun, they want the spontaneity. So they love starting new things. They have lots of energy. They are not afraid of change. They love to explore and try and do all this stuff. They're great coming out of their comfort zone. But where they struggle is oftentimes the follow through. For them, it's the planning of the trip that's fun. And then once they get there, it's like, okay, what am I doing next? A girlfriend of mine who's a seven, she just finished planning her daughter's wedding. And so all the planning, she was excited. And as soon as the wedding happened, she's like, okay, what are we doing now? Because they get that dopamine hit from that planning of what's next. And so finding that, um, that routine of the everyday, the routine of laundry, dishes, filing papers, whatever it is like snooze fest to a lot of people, but specifically to a seven, because they would rather be doing something fun. They also get easily distracted. And so because they're so interested in doing so many different things and just keeping their attention going at all times, keeping them on task and keeping them kind of like redirected when it comes to organization and following through on a project that might not be a fun project is the work of a 7. Another thing is because 7s tend to have like lots of different interests and hobbies and are always trying something new, they have to be leery or weary of struggling with excess, having a lot of things. Again, I've gone to people's houses and worked with clients who were like, I was into knitting and then I was into beer making and then we started doing skiing and then I took a pottery class. And so, like, all of these different interests, which are great, accumulate things, right? They translate into things. And then once you're like over the things, it's taking that extra step to say, okay, now I'm going to sell it, donate it, get rid of it, give it away, whatever it looks like, instead of leaving it in my basement, garage, attic to just collect dust. And so just being really intentional of like, okay, we're going to bring into, we're into a new hobby or onto a new thing. Let's make sure that we make room and get rid of the old stuff. And because our attention span is limited, I think it's just knowing, kind of setting those parameters. Maybe a 7 isn't going to sit there and work for 4 or 5 hours in one stretch. Maybe they're going to work for an hour and then go do something fun. And that's okay. It's, again, finding the strategy and the system that works for you. Okay, we got 2 more types to go through. Next one up is the challenger, which is 8s. And now we're moving into the gut triad. And so the 8s are myself. They are all about justice, what's doing right. They are quick processors. We make decisions very quickly. They are called the challengers because conflict actually energizes us. We just see it as like healthy conflict, not necessarily unhealthy conflict. But we're here to support the underdog, right? We want to help people wherever they are. We want to support the marginalized people, and we want to use our superpowers to lead others. And we are doers, which is all great qualities of the 8. But 8 struggle as well with clutter and organization for a lot of different reasons. Well, again, some of the additional strengths is that we're problem solvers. We are very decisive. Where other types are indecisive, we can make decisions very quickly, which is great when it comes to organization because I can make a decision pretty quickly. I don't want to get rid of it. I want to keep it, don't keep it, whatever. So where other types, that may be a really exhaustive process. For 8s, it's not. That is like a superpower for an 8 because we can make decisions and we will just adapt. If it's a decision and it's a wrong decision, okay, well, we'll figure it out. We have lots of energy. So where your 5s and even your 9s don't have a ton of energy, your 3s, your 8s and your 7s have a lot of energy. So that's all great when it comes to clutter and organization because it means we could do a lot. We oftentimes are juggling a lot of different balls in the air. But where we can struggle is being overscheduled. That is one of the biggest things that 8s struggle with, is not overcommitting. Because we are doers, because we are those take charge people, we oftentimes will take on more than we have time to handle. And then that can result in us being explosive and combative and, intimidating to people. And those are the qualities that you want to avoid, because really at our core, 8s don't want to be that way, but we oftentimes lack the self-introspection when you're first learning the Enneagram of realizing how kind of big you are in the room. 8s also, if you're working with somebody who is not an 8 and you're an 8, oftentimes I know as a parent, it can become very frustrating because we have a low tolerance for indecision because we can make decisions quickly. When you're working with somebody, if it's a child, a spouse that has to go through that slower process because they need to go through analytically or emotionally, like getting rid of things, and 8 could be like, come on, people, let's go. And so that oftentimes results in a conflict. And just being aware of it, I think, is the biggest takeaway. Most 8s I know, myself included, don't really struggle with a lot of physical clutter because we can make decisions, because we're not as emotionally attached as some of the other types are. But really being mindful of kind of that calendar clutter or the mental clutter, taking on too many things in our lives, is a pitfall that we can easily fall into. All right, let's go. We're in the home stretch, people. Oh, we're going to round things out with our nines. So our nines are the peacemakers, and love me some nines. They are patient and kind. And as much as eights get energized by conflict, our peacemakers are your conflict avoidant people. They will do anything at any cost to avoid a conflict. And I know we all know at least one person in our lives who will avoid conflict at any cost. Because nines have this ability to kind of see all sides, they're really good listeners. And they're called what I call mergers, meaning they like to just blend in with the group. They aren't going to do what you want because they're being a martyr. They're just merging because they're pretty chill. For the most part, nines can be a little bit indecisive, which can work against them. But because of their indecisiveness, they'll just merge with whatever the group's doing. You want to go out for Chinese food? We'll go out for Chinese food. You want to go to a movie? We'll go to a movie. And that is kind of the beauty of the peacemaker, is they are pretty go with the flow. And they're kind of what you see is what you get. They're like not really overly complex. And I don't mean that like they're simpletons, but there's not a, they're very transparent in that sense, where like your fours are super complex and have all these like textures and layers. Nines are kind of the opposite of that, which makes it easy to kind of communicate because they want to just simplify everything. And we're all about simplification. Some additional strengths of the nines is that, they're pretty easygoing and they're able to see all different sides to a scenario, a problem. They're very respectful of authority. They're not like, resisting authority. So if you are, as a parent child dynamic, they're usually going to do what they're told or do what they're asked. They're very active and engaged in the tasks that they're doing. But when it comes to clutter and organization, they can really struggle with that indecision because they just don't, a lot of times they just don't care enough. Like it's not as important to them. They don't really see it. They're oftentimes what I call clutter blind. Like they don't even see the dirty dishes in the sink. They don't see the toys on the floor. They're just more concerned with like keeping the peace and conserving their energy of being like chill, that the other stuff is just not anything that's going to get them all worked up the way it would some of the other types. And one of the areas that nines have to really be careful of, because they are peacemakers, is they don't necessarily value their opinion, their own opinion. Um, Similar yet different to a two, but having them know, like, no, what do you really think about this? Because a lot of times if you ask a nine, like, do you want to keep this? Do you want to get rid of it? What do you want to do about that? The response will be like, I don't care. And sometimes it's they truly don't care. And sometimes it's they're so used to just keeping the peace that they don't take the time to actually really think about, I actually do have an opinion about this. I really do have an opinion. So really understanding that their voice matters is really empowering for a nine. But because they're also chill and because they can see multiple like scenarios that can also work against them, and they can easily get distracted because they're working on one thing and then somebody else calls them. So I always say nines, if you have like a to-do list of 10 things, nines are going to struggle with prioritizing what comes first. They're just going to see all those things and be like, I don't know where to go. So really helping those nines prioritize what's important in this particular season, time frame, whatever it is really, really a great tool to help them navigate the world of organization. So I want to just give a quick overview again, quick summary. So there's 9 core types, right? Everyone has one dominant type. We are connected through all the different types, and you guys are all getting complimentary copies of our Enneagram framework, which goes in depth about the wings and the triads and the stances. And again, we're going to do other follow-up workshops to show how the different types are connected to each other, because again, that is, a whole next layer of it and plays into how we relate and how we respond. And even though you are connected to the other types, the beauty of it is your core motivation never changes. So I'm an 8. And even though I have connection points to a 7 and a 9 and a 2 and a 5, my core motivation never changes, which means my core, I'm still motivated by justice, and the principles stand true consistently throughout my life. And really, all your type does, I'm not trying to oversimplify it, it's the lens in which we see the world. And I always say that there's not a one size fits all. And we talk a lot about the golden rule of life, right? We want to treat others the way we want to be treated. But essentially, it's really not. It's really, how do we want those people to be treated? How you see the world. Because what works for me might not work for you. And each one of us struggle with clutter in some way, whether it's that emotional clutter, whether it's that mental clutter, whether it's physical clutter, digital clutter, whatever it is, we all have pockets that we are more prone to and other areas where we might thrive. And it's all different. And so the strategies that we need to use are going to be different. So we need to know somebody that's a slower processor versus a quicker processor, or somebody that's more making decisions emotionally versus analytically, or somebody that just jumps right in and just, kind of shoots straight from the hip. And so knowing this about not just your type, but about all the types will help you to develop those strategies that will resonate with the people that you're trying to work with. And also, what I think is so important is it allows you to have a clearer picture of how other people view you. So for me, one of the biggest eye-opening experiences of learning about the Enneagram and then again applying it with clutter is knowing, how am I coming across to people as a parent, as a spouse, as a professional organizer? How is my approach as an 8 resonating with other people? And so I can take the information of knowing these are the characteristics of my type and then apply that practically of, okay, if I know these certain characteristics of me, how can I show up to be super healthy with the other people in my life? And really, they are 3 key takeaways that I like to always end with for people when I'm talking about the Enneagram. It's not prescriptive, first of all, meaning it's not a cure-all, it's not an answer, it's a context. What the Enneagram does is it gives us insight. It gives us insight into how we see the world. It gives us insight into how others see the world. The second thing is it gives us language. It gives us language to be able to use words like feeling dominant, thinking dominant, leading with your gut, all of the different words, phrases, and have like a common communication language that you can use to say, this is where I'm struggling and this is where I need help. Because sometimes we don't have the words to express where we're struggling or why we're struggling. And so what I love about the Enneagram is if you can understand your type, you can understand a little bit about the healthy parts of you and the unhealthy parts of you. And that can help you know where to say, this is where I need extra support. And then the third takeaway is it gives you that perspective. So again, not an excuse, but if you see, for example, a 4 who's somebody that oftentimes is always running late and always struggling with clutter and not ever finishing tasks. And again, I don't mean to be picking on the 4s out there, but if you see this as a common thing, maybe you can have some perspective and grace and say, okay, what you're doing isn't working. So we need to tweak and find some specific strategies that are going to work for you. If you know that you have a 5 that is constantly, really, really gathering information and so stuck in that groove, that wheel of a planning phase, you want to be able to take that. And now that we know this, it gives us perspective so that you can then alter the strategy and make it more applicable to what makes sense for them. And I don't know if you guys have this or not, but we have an Enneagram cheat sheet. And I'll make sure that it goes out to you guys in the follow-up. So we'll just include the link right there so that you can have access to our Enneagram cheat sheet. It's a handout that has a breakdown of each of the different types, what their motivations are, where they're dominant, if it's in their gut center, head, heart, whatever it is, so that you can have a little bit more insight into who you are, and then say, okay, what do I want to do with it? What am I going to do now that I know this information? And so we're going to open it up to Q&A. And before I do, I'm just going to put this last slide on for you, because I want you guys, and we'll send this out, the slide deck as well in the replay, so that people can have this presentation and go back and look at it and really digest it. Because I know I went through the slides fairly quickly because I wanted to make sure that everyone had a chance to we had a chance to get through everything and have time for Q&A. But we're going to give you this, but this has all of our contact information. That's my personal email. You can send me any specific questions you have. Of course, our social media handles, as well as our podcast, which is on YouTube, as well as whatever your podcast apps are. And we do lots of different talk about the Enneagram, talk all about different strategies and how you can use the gifts of your own Enneagram type to reduce that clutter and have some organization. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and come back and allow you guys to unmute yourselves. And I'm going to we have a question in the chat. So Melina says, when you work with couples or families with different Enneagram numbers, how do you approach the organizing strategy? Okay, that's a great question. So I think it's important to just recognize that everyone's going to have a different threshold and different goals. So I think it's important to say, what do we want as a family unit? What's going to work? What are we trying to accomplish in our family, right? Do we want to what are the common ground rules? And I think that should stem from the parents of like, what do we want? Like, I want to walk in the house and not see a sink full of dishes. I think it starts with establishing kind of like, what are the specific ground rules that we want, and paint that visual picture. Because when we talk, we oftentimes use words, but people think in pictures. So you're like, I want to come in and not see a cluttered space. And to one person, one dish in the sink can equal clutter. And to somebody else, it could be, the whole entire, I was baking a cake and I left every ingredient out. So I think really defining, being very specific of what does that look like to me, right? I want to come in. So it's being specific of, I want the kids to come home and I want your backpacks hung up in a specific space, or I want your, I want your beds made every morning. So I think being very clear and specific. And then then once we can establish kind of those ground rules, the next thing is to say, okay, what are the strategies that that each one of us can do? And what is the realistic time frame to do it? So I know from my own personal experience, a certain job, a certain task, an organizing task that might take me 10 minutes is going to take one of my kids a half an hour because of the process that she needs to go through. She needs to go through it and we'll go down memory lane and do all these things. So I think setting some actual time frame and you could do it a couple ways. I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think you can approach it, say, we're going to dedicate this amount of time to do this job, or you could, which I think works for certain types, right? Like, especially like a 7, if you give them a time frame, it's like, you can do this and then we'll move on to something else. Or you give them a specific task of, I need you to go through this bin, this basket. I need you to get all of your clothes picked up and be very specific. And when that's done, then you can move on to the next. So I think it's about looking at which strategy is going to work for those people. Is it giving them some people may stress out about a timer, and other people may be like, yeah, like, let me make this and see how quickly I can get this thing done. So I think it's a matter of looking at, for some people, it might work one way, and another people, it might work another way, and realize that both avenues are right. It's just going to be for different people. It's like when I had my kids, and my one daughter used to come home from school and do her homework right away. and she wanted to just get it done. And so then she could play. And the other one needed to come home and unwind. And I would try to force her to sit and do her homework. And then we would wind up sitting there for 3 hours and she'd end up in tears and then I finally realized if I give her half an hour to decompress and then she comes in and does it, she's going to get it done. So it's trying to figure out how can you have these common goals. And in that particular scenario, the goal was before dinner, you have to have your homework done. So you could either play first and then do your homework or do your homework and then play. But either way, it has to get done. And I think that's how I tend to approach organizing in a family, right? You can take a different path, but at the end of the day, we still have to get to the same place. Anybody else? Any other specific questions about a specific Enneagram type or a specific solution that might, for where someone might be struggling? Maureen.
Hi, Lori.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I love your podcasts. I just have to tell you.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I appreciate that so much.
All the Enneagram, woven in with organization. I think it's so cool.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I'm a Enneagram 5.
Okay.
As I've gotten older, I've gotten more successful at paring down my things. But right now I'm going through, I'm deeply into self-awareness and systems and things like that. And so I'm going through my journals and my notes that I've written in for many, many years about all this stuff. And I think it's a different reason that I'm trying to keep them from a Enneagram 6. My reason is I need to keep my resources. I need to keep information. Because what if I want to write a book, or what if I, what if I want to look back at it? So do you have, because I could just keep it all.
Yes.
But I would prefer not to. So do you have any tips?
So such a great question. And I actually have I have a client. She actually moved, so I don't get to see her as much anymore, but I love her. And I suspect was an Enneagram 5, not typing anybody, but I suspect she was, and very similar scenario, had a lot of journals and actually was a writer and had kept tons and tons of notebooks and journals for that very purpose. And it is something that is a process to work through. And one of the things that I've tried to communicate with her through the years is the easy first of all, picking the easier things. I knew those journals were the holy grail of that was the last thing we were going to tackle. Okay. So just from a practical, tactical perspective, I was like, let's deal with the old newspapers first, right? Because that was easier to grasp. So it was, let's start with the stuff that doesn't have as much kind of emotional stronghold for us. So let's get the lower hanging fruit. So that was the first thing, to start to build that muscle and start to get into that practice of getting rid of those things. Because even for her, it was that, well, I might want to go back and reference that article. I want to go back and, pull that recipe from that, magazine. And so just really getting those things in place before we tackled her own stuff, getting the third party content out of the way was really helpful in just kind of getting into that routine of, it's okay for me to get rid of it. And then it comes down to having those conversations. And as a 5, a lot of the 5s like to write things down and have that, fact, right? Because we're all about facts versus feelings. And thinking about how long have I had this? What is the reality? Do I think I'm going to write a book? What does my space look like? And what is the goal of what I want this next chapter of my life to look like? And are these physical journals, things that I have in my way, not in my way, but in my space, standing in the way for me to reach where I want to go, whether that means I'm going to downsize. I just want to, I just don't want to be surrounded by as much physical clutter. Are these things easy for me to retrieve? And just even the exercise. And it's, again, I don't want to go down the whole rabbit hole of past, present, future, but the part of the Enneagram talks about your orientation to time, for those of you who don't know. And the 4s, 5s, and 9s, their orientation to time is the past. So the fact that you sit there and you're like, I'm going back through them and reading through is an exercise that not every Enneagram type would do, because that is you're going back in time to like go back and reflect. And I think that that's totally fine if that is bringing you that, if it's helping you with your process of deciding whether or not you want to hold on to it. But I think it's about setting that, like, what are my boundaries? What do I want my space to look like? If I know that I'm surrounded floor to ceiling, or, not floor to ceiling, but if I'm surrounded by journals, is that standing in my way from something else? And is there other, because your resources are so finite, would be freeing up that space allow me to dedicate resources elsewhere that are important to me?
Mhm.
Whether that's with people or other hobbies. If I didn't have these things there, would I be able to do something else?
That's great. I can see that there's a list that I'm going to write down from all those things you said, because
Okay.
I think I've already gone through the third party stuff. It's gone.
Yeah. Good for you.
Yeah. But yeah, the journals, and it would be really hard to get to mine much from them, because they're kind of jumbled. And I've already gone into the 4 different places where they're stored and put a note in saying to my son, saying, if you find these, don't read them, destroy them. So,
So if that's the case,
yeah.
okay. So if that's the case, what is holding you back from just saying, I'm going to spare, as somebody who values time and resources, I don't want my son to have to use his time and resources to go through that one day.
Yeah. I'm almost there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that, what you just asked me will help me a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
good. I'm cheering for you, and reach out with any questions.
But what if we missed my book then?
You know what? I feel like
I'm kidding.
I was like, come on, you've got a lot to offer. You've got a lot to offer. Anybody else that wants to chime in? Yes, Crystal.
I'm a 2 with a 3 and a 9 arm. They're
Okay.
very close on the quiz.
Uh-huh.
And my motivation is more for relationships more than clutter, although clutter is caused a lot of strife in our home because of my kids' relationships with my kids. We've adopted, and my daughters have a lot of trauma and mental illness. And so I'm wondering, how does the Enneagram work for someone for those different experiences, and how does it contribute? Because I want to understand them better. So we are close, but there's just so much strife going on, and I want to be able to help them better.
How old are your girls?
They're now 16 and 19, but we adopted when they were 2 months and 3. So,
well, those are tough ages in general, even under the best of circumstances. As a mom of 2 girls, anyway, that I, have biologically. So those are just, there's a lot going on in their underdeveloped brains, even under the best of circumstances, let alone adding in adoption and drama. I think I'm trying to think of how I want to answer the question. So I think the beauty of the Enneagram is that, again, it can allow you to have conversation. It can open the door for conversation and just understanding from a contextual perspective. We're not prescribing, we're not labeling people, we're not making excuses for behavior, but we're just saying, oh, okay, I never thought of that way, because that's just not what I think. Like for me, I don't factor it, you're 2, so you're like very much driven by relations and emotions, and how is what I'm saying going to be impacted. And I tell it like it is person, and I'm like, I just want you to have the honest answer. And you might be like, oh my God, but that's going to hurt my feelings, or that's going to hurt somebody's feelings. So I think it's just about having that awareness. There's a lot of different schools of thought about how your Enneagram type, whether it comes from birth or is developed younger in life. I've read totally different schools of thought on that. I think we certainly are born with certain tendencies, but then our life experiences, I think definitely weigh into what our dominant type is. That's just my personal thought, so if somebody has had to step into a caretaking role, that wouldn't be surprised if they were a 2 or a 9. If somebody felt like they were abandoned at a young age and had to take on a lot for themselves, it wouldn't be surprising that they were an 8. You know what I mean? So I think there's different, again, not an excuse, but a context for your Enneagram type. So I think if you can look back at what was your life like growing up. And then when it comes to, what do you do with that information? I think if you can understand, if you know their Enneagram type, and it's like knowing the love languages. I was just having this conversation yesterday, right? So we all have, if you're not familiar, Gary Chapman, 5 love languages. And to me, your Enneagram type is like another way to communicate like you would with your love language. If somebody really appreciates that nurturing, that they want that space, or they want you there close, then give them that. If there's somebody that really needs that autonomy, giving them that autonomy. Now, within that parent-child dynamic, and especially that mother-daughter dynamic, there's going to be boundaries and relational shifts and pulls, but just being consistent, I think, as a mom is really important, and letting them know what your personal boundaries are, what is allowed and what's not, because just because, you want to respect somebody doesn't mean they have the right to, cause,
Right.
cause conflict.
Right.
Using the Enneagram as a way to just have some common language. Like when we're not seeing eye to eye, I just want to understand, like, I'm using, and I always try to not use Enneagram ease. I call it like the Enneagram, and just use things like thoughts, feelings, actions, hearts, gut, like the words that we all know, whether you know the Enneagram or not. Like I'm making this decision from emotion. I'm making this decision, from, analytically, or I'm reacting. I'm reacting. Like 8s will react, right? We're very, you know,
Yes.
what's the word I'm looking for? Like, we're just like, we'll
Impulsive and just
impulsive. Exactly. So I think just knowing that and taking that with a grain of salt to a degree, without your kids being like totally disrespectful,
Right.
is the best way to.
In my mind, I think of like my ideal situation would be that I would sit down with them and go through the quiz just for fun and have them answer it, so that I could see. I mean, I think I know how they would answer,
Yeah.
but to get to see what they would really say.
Would they be open to it? So you know what I've done in our family? Like I did it a couple years ago at Thanksgiving. So when I started really getting to the Enneagram, one of the books that I always recommend if people want to read a book is The Road Back to You. I get no endorsement from it, but it's from Suzanne Stabile and Ian Morgan Cron. And on each chapter of the 9 types, there's like a checklist, and it has like 10 descriptors of characteristics of each of the types. And so we were like all sitting around, and I just pulled out the book and I'm like, tell me who this sounds like. And I would read it, and I did it for all the 9 types. So we weren't like necessarily even taking a quiz. And that sparked a conversation for everybody to then want to take a quiz and see where they really typed. But we almost just did it as like a fun party game of like, who does this? And then it just opened the door for conversation. Because a
I
lot of
love
times,
that.
yeah. And that way people don't feel like they're being graded, or this is a good, this is bad, or well, I don't want to do that. But it was just very organic and conversational. And so you can make it less structured as opposed to like, okay, we're going to sit down and take a quiz and then we're going to talk about it.
Yeah. I know they would never read the book. So I was like,
But you don't have to, right? So you don't have
right,
to,
right.
and again, so my older daughter is a 9, but she thought she was a 2. She also thought she was a 6 because there's connection points with all of them. And so when she was going back and forth, then she went in, and after having just some general conversations, because especially if her mom's doing this, she doesn't want to, I don't want to do it. So this is what you do for a living. Like, no, thank you. But her own curiosity got the best of her to be able to just like read a little blurb about it. So she didn't sit down and read the book, but she did. I was like, here's like 10 things about the 2. Here's 10 things about the 9. And that was digestible for them.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Oh my God. And good luck. That's hard. And Godspeed for you to, raising kids is hard. Really is. It really is. And I said, I wish I knew the Enneagram when my kids were younger, because as much as my focus is really how does it relate with clutter and organization, I just think a communication tool would have been so much more useful as a parent for me. But here we are. Anybody else? Anybody else?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
All right. I'll get Georgie first, and then Mickey, I'll get you after. So Georgie, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. And nice to meet you in person. I'm also a big fan of the podcast.
Oh, thank you.
So it's fun to be on here. I think you kind of actually just answered my question by using the road back to you descriptors to help define. I took your original Enneagram course, and I've done some other reading. I started reading Road Back to You, and I'm kind of hung up on, I can't quite figure out what Enneagram type I am. And I keep getting like, I think, okay, that's probably it. And then I'll read, the orientation to time. No, that can't be me. Or the stance is not, no, that's not me, And so I guess my question is, what, maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe I can just ignore that. And what is the most, how do I get to that core? How do I,
So a lot of times, and again, for a lot of people, there is not one type that stands out, right? Like for me, I was like, oh yeah, that's me. I could have my picture next to it. But I know for a lot of people, that's not the case. So one of the first things I tell people when, or I don't tell them, but one of the first things I ask people when I'm talking to them is, when I talk about thinking, feeling, and doing, do you get a particular response to like, yes, I feel like I make decisions one way over another? Do you feel like you're somebody that does make decisions one way over another? Or first?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it's either thinking or doing.
Okay.
I'm an analyst in my job, so that's going back to your example with your teacher friend. Like, I don't know how much of it is, my answers are so overpowered by what I do professionally.
Yes.
So
another thing is, and this is again not prescriptive, but a lot of times, because 9s tend to see multiple sides to a scenario, I've had a lot of people who are 9s really struggle with typing themselves, because they're like, I can relate to a little bit about this type, and I can relate to a little bit about that type, which is so on brand for a 9, because 9s have the ability to see all sides. So that would be something that might be something to consider. What are the types that because there's some I'm sure that you ruled out. You're like, I'm definitely not this. I'm definitely not. So what are the 2 or 3 that you're really kind of wrestling between?
I think it's 6 and 9.
Okay.
Probably maybe a little bit of a 1. I think the first quiz it was a 1. I'm like, I don't think that. And I know the 6 pops up because I live in the Pacific Northwest, and it's been a big topic about the Cascadia, subduction zone, and earthquake preparedness, which has really resonates with me. And so, and I've always
Yeah.
been a little bit of a, Girl Scout that way.
Yeah.
But so I know that overpowers a lot of my answers. And so, but is that my core? This is where I'm going back and forth.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And again, if you look at, and I just kind of wrote it down, if you go back and look at the model, like the 6 and the 9 are so connected. So it's like,
Mhm.
again, without going down the rabbit hole today, but what number do you go to in stress? So like the 9, in times of stress, when you're unhealthy and you're stressed, the 9 picks up characteristics of the 6. So like my daughter, the 9, used to be petrified of storms and was so anxiety ridden that I was like, she had like a weather tracker app on her phone growing up. And she would be like, oh, there's a storm. I'm sleeping in the basement. Like she would just,
Mm.
and it would consume her, which is a very on the surface 6 behavior, very worst case
Mhm.
scenario. It's like, oh, it's going to rain. No, we're going to get a hurricane and a flood. Like that's how which again, on the surface is very 6-ish, but at her core, it was all about keeping the peace. And that's when the really understanding of like, no, my core, my core motivation at the
Motivation.
end of the
Yeah.
day is keeping the peace. And yes, it shows up for me that, and of course, you're talking about potential earthquakes. You'd be like crazy not to have that weigh on you. Like you're human. So, but I think that there's understanding, is this situational? Because the behavior might display very 6-ish, but
Mhm.
you might not be truly a 6 at the end of the day. And I just actually did a typing session with somebody about 3 weeks ago, and she was toggling between a 9 and 6. And when we were talking through it, she's like, yep, I'm a 9. But it was a very
Okay.
similar exercise.
Okay. No, that's helpful. I'll revisit those and think, kind of put a little different filter on things. And it's
Yes.
not keeping me from decluttering. I just would kind of like to land on what I think I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it's important. It's good to know, but it's not
Mhm.
the end all be all. That's the other thing I
Mhm.
want to say is, yes, you want to know. And I think it's great because it can really give you, but we're just using language and we're going to apply strategies that are going to help, that are going to resonate with us so that we're not white knuckling through the things.
Mhm.
For example, when it comes to the relational piece or the organization piece, a strategy that's going to work for a 1 as a perfectionist is totally different than what's going to work for a 7. So if you, but it might be a similar strategy to a different type. So finding the rhythm that works, that makes sense for you. And you're like, yes, I feel like I can do this repeatedly and have it help me find peace in my life, is really what we're going after.
No, that's great.
Sorry, Mickey, I'm going to turn it over to you and take a drink.
Okay. Well, my quick question was, well, you mentioned the love languages, and they have written, love languages for children. Is there a particular assessment or recommendation that you might have for kids? And then also, is there a particular age, that they would, that someone would have the maturity enough to be able to identify, or you would help them identify, like not when they're 5, but maybe when they're 8 or 12 or whatever.
Yeah, that's such a good question. So, to answer your first question, I don't know of any specific like books or resources that I can be like, oh yes, here's a great book for like Enneagram kids. I know Suzanne Stabile's daughter, Joey Shuey, and she's been on my show before. She has an Instagram handle. I don't know if it's a YouTube channel also, called Enneagram and Parents, or Enneagram Parents. It's either Enneagram and Parents or Enneagram Parents.
I think I've seen that.
That she does with her husband, because they're both Enneagram facilitators. And they talk about Enneagram parenting, different types. So
Yeah.
that might be a good resource for you. I don't know of any like physical actual material that you can do. In terms of assessments, I don't know of any specific assessments. And I know it's frowned upon to do it too early. And I think that that's a very broad 10,000 broad stroke, because people are going to mature at different levels. We want to be mindful not to pigeonhole people into
Right.
certain, types. As parents, I think it's anybody, it's human nature, especially if you're into the Enneagram, to like meet somebody and make some opinions. But it's really, I think when they become teenagers is when you can have that conversation with them to really type, because I think they could maybe make some decisions a little bit more discerningly. But I think elements will show up like a little bit younger. I mean, like you said, not 5, but I think I could look at like a 12 or 13-year-old and see certain characteristics of like, you could be this, you could be that. I think it's very easy. And I say, I'm using that term loosely, to immediately rule certain types out for certain people. Like, somebody that's definitely probably not, a particular type. Like, there are certain things that I'm like, yeah, there's no way that this is even going to be on the radar for me, but I might fall into this grouping. And you'll see other types that might be like, it was very evident to me that my younger daughter was a 4, and I know I'm not supposed to type her. And then when she did it, I was like, yeah. And one of the biggest giveaways was, she's like, Mom, what if I do the Enneagram and I find out that I'm an Enneagram 12? And I go, well, the fact that there is no Enneagram 12 just reinforces the fact that you're an Enneagram 4, because of course you would make up your own Enneagram type that doesn't even exist like that. She's like, well, I want to be the only Enneagram 12 in the world. Well, there you go. So I think you can just have those conversations without doing a test, and just ask those probing questions about thoughts and feelings and action. And are you somebody that's really like more, gut driven? Are you a risk taker? Are you somebody that's more emotional? Are you more analytical? And just asking those kind of probing questions, those open-ended probing questions, will give you some insight into how their mind works.
And is that how you do that with your clients? Because like you said,
Yeah.
you don't really want to probe. I mean,
type them.
type them,
Yep.
but yeah, I'm actually a photo organizer.
You are? Oh my
Yeah.
God. God bless you. Wait, with physical photos or digital or both?
Well, I'm physical.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so I help people that have had those boxes in their attic or wherever for years. And now it's like, okay, let's do something with them. And everybody is so different. So I'm trying to, no, I'm not trying to, I will kind of put this all together. But that was the other question, is like, well, you don't go in and you type somebody, but
no,
it would be very helpful to understand.
Okay, Mickey, I do applying the Enneagram with clients workshop. You have to come and take that one.
I will.
Yeah.
Totally.
But to answer your question, is that's exactly how I do it.
Okay.
I don't go in unless somebody's interested and they're like, oh, can we sit down and do a typing and let's do this? I don't necessarily even bring it up as something that we're talking about. I just ask these open-ended questions about what their childhood was like. And, are they somebody that do they find that they are very emotionally tied to things? Are they somebody that's more analytical? Are you just kind of a, let's roll up our sleeves and dive right in type person? Like, give me some insight. And just asking those questions gives me some insight into the direction that I'm going to go. So I might not know exactly, but if I can narrow it down to maybe where they might be naturally stronger or where they naturally struggle, that will help me then say, okay, let's apply this strategy.
Great. Look forward to it.
Yeah. Is there any other questions that anybody has that I can answer for you guys?
Just real quick, I'm looking to buy the book, The Road Back to You. And I noticed that they have a workbook also. Would that little question checklist be in the book or the workbook, or should I get both?
It's in the book. I actually have both because I did it myself. The workbook is like, I think it's not that much money. It's like super, I think I have, look, I even have So like, this is the workbook. Like it's super like small.
Okay.
You don't, this would be more for you. I would not give this to them. They're going to be like, you're giving me homework. But
Okay.
yeah, in the book on the, each one of the pages, like under each type, that'll say characteristics of the ones, and that's it. And then you don't even have to read the chapter. You could just go through those 9
Okay.
things and go through that.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. No, you're welcome. Good luck. Let me know how you make out. Well, I hope you guys found this useful. I hope it gave you some additional insight and perspective and ways to look at things. And I really think that this, again, tool can be really helpful in all aspects of relationships. And for me, it comes down to reducing the conflict and the stress that comes with life. And a lot of times that clutter falls into that. And so just understanding that and having the strategies that we can apply. And so we're going to be, like I said, we're going to be doing follow-up workshops. We're going to be doing ones that are more specific and targeted to like, hey, if you know that you're very feeling dominant, like we're going to have ones that are tied to each of the different centers. So we can really kind of go in deeper with some specific strategies for each one. Again, I'm going to do the applying Enneagram with clients, which again, you don't have to be a professional organizer. If you're in any service-based business that you have a relationship with people, this could be something that you could do of how can you apply it with other people in that setting. So you're all on the list, on our email list, and we'll make sure that you guys get first dibs at getting the sign up for that. And that'll all be done after the new year. And thank you guys so much for showing up today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, guys.
Love
Take
to
care.
hear a podcast on the ADHD too. That was like those like weeks. I listened to you while I walk my dogs, and I was just like so excited to see what you were going to be sharing that day. So that was very helpful.
Oh, thank you so much for that feedback. And yes, I loved it. We've gotten so much feedback about that ADHD series. I think it's really important. We plan on doing more of them. And so definitely keep the feedback coming on the show, because we want to make sure that we're delivering like more fun, like content that you guys are going to enjoy and be valuable to you. So thank you so much for that. So, all right, everybody, happy
Thank you.
holidays. Bye.
You too.